Dr. Jackie's here, changing life loving you. Yeah, that's the groove, life loving you. Feel the truth, move, life loving you. It's all we do, come on through, it's just for you.
Welcome back to Life Lovin' You with Dr. Jacquie, America's marriage and relationship coach. In this powerful episode, we're diving deep into what makes relationships thrive, not just survive. Originally aired with Montel Williams, this remix brings clarity, wisdom, and soul from Dr. Jackie's signature perspective. Whether you're in love, looking for it, or learning how to keep it, this episode lays the foundation for emotional health, romantic resilience, and truth-telling love. Let's get into it.
Hey guys, Montel here, and welcome to this edition of Free Thinking with Montel. My guest today has engineered a host of tools to cultivate the skills for healthy relationships and marriage, and is referred to as America's marriage coach. She's an educator, an author, advocate, and counselor who holds a Bachelor of Science in Psychology, a Master's and Doctorate in Education, with emphasis on conflict resolution and curriculum development. She has been twice invited to the White House, worked on public policy, and provided congressional testimony. As a participant on the White House National Advisory Panel, she helped shape national standards for teen pregnancy prevention programs. Dr. Jacquie de Rosario, thank you so much for joining us today on Free Thinking with Montel.
Hey, it's my pleasure to be here, Montel.
Absolutely, Dr. Jacquie. Look, why don't you tell me a little bit about your background first and where you grew up, where you went to school, those kinds of things.
Well, actually, I'm Miami grown, born and raised in Miami, Florida, all my years, a globetrotter, but still call Miami my home. I'm living in paradise.
That's crazy. And where'd you go to school?
So I went to public schools. I went to Killian Senior High, went to University of Miami for my undergrad, University of Miami again for my training and coaching, and then Nova Southeastern for my master's and my doctorate degree.
And why did you decide to focus your career on relationships?
It started for me at around the age of 5, 6 years old. I remember being awakened in the middle of the night to this gut-wrenching cry. And I'm sitting up in my bed thinking, who is that? And after a few moments, I was able to recognize it was my mother's voice. And she was obviously in some sort of deep pain. And she was saying, why? And I realized at that young age that we rise or fall in a good or bad relationship. And so that, for me, began to cultivate this drive to understand what makes relationships, good or bad, work for us and how to build and cultivate them. And so, you know how it starts. You know, when you're young, you're maybe a teenager, everybody wants to talk to you about it for advice. And they find that what you say hits. So then they come back. And then I began to formally pursue an education. So I've read the books and done all of that stuff so that I can help people to learn how to develop very healthy and fulfilling relationships.
But coming out of that I don't know, nightmare scenario at age 5, did you start, well, you probably were a little young to start reading then, but how did you start developing the skills that you had, knowing that you were one of those people that people could come to and ask for advice?
Mm-hmm. Well, for one thing, you become a strict observer. I began to observe patterns in relationships. I think that that's really the definition of wisdom. So many definitions that people give, but to me, when you recognize patterns, you know what to anticipate. When this and that happens, then this is what follows. And so I began to observe. I began to study people. I began to study interpersonal skills, interpersonal relationships between individuals. And I just found that that was my jumping off point.
And this is like ages 12, 13, 14, 15. Did you try to set some of your friends like start to turn against you? Like, girl, stop criticizing me.
No. Actually, they started running to me because they found that whatever I said worked. And so, you know how it is. You start hearing the same thing. You know, you're good at this. You're good at that. And that's kind of what helps to form our ideas of who we are and what we're going to do in the future.
So when you went through undergrad, did you go through undergrad knowing that your focus was going to end up being on trying to analyze and study relationships?
That never changed. So for me, I wanted to become a psychiatrist. So I was actually pre-med at UM and I just wanted to figure it out. And I got to do an internship and I realized that most psychiatrists don't agree necessarily on diagnoses. And it's a lot of work. And so still became a doctor through a PhD format, but learned of my own ways of understanding how to help people now. Not how does it make you feel, let's go back 15 years, but What can we do now? So I think that I'm a pragmatist. I think that my tools are very realistic and impactful. So I can get someone from here to there in a very short period of time.
You know, with 100% complete disclosure, I've been working with psychiatrist Dr. Frank Burke now for about 12 years on an initiative that is called RTM, Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories. I don't know if you've heard of it. It is literally selected and been chosen by the ISTSS as one of the only cures, I say use that loosely, for PTSD that exists right now on the planet. It's been deployed right now in the Ukraine. We're looking to deploy it hopefully in Israel as soon as there's a break in the hostilities, because it is proven to be 95 to 96% efficacious in remitting all symptoms of PTSD in 5 to 10 hours, no medication. And, you know, I found working with Dr. Burke and, you know, working within the psychological or psychiatric community around the world, from our government to our military to, our first responders, that I had a really, really, really bright doctor who's one of the nation's leading neurologists tell me about 12 years ago, Montel, you know that anything that's transformative in medicine, especially psychiatry, is only met with the most vehement and adamant resistance by those who are in the community. And I've seen this firsthand. I have witnessed and watched psychiatrists and doctors who were proponents of prolonged exposure therapy literally fight this breakthrough to the teeth, to the death. I mean, it's been, and to the detriment of our warfighters and people suffering from PTSD. This protocol has been known now for over 12 years in the United States, has been utilized, probably treated close to 1,000 patients across the country. It's been double-blind studied at Harvard. It's been double-blind studied at the Walter Reed, at King's College.
Quick question. Does it, when you say in about 10 hours, it alleviates the signs of PTSD? So you're talking about the symptomology of PTSD.
Symptomology. Yes, okay. Symptomology. So person can go in and about 10 hours later, they will come out and they personally will acknowledge the fact that they have remitted all the symptoms that they were complaining about before they started the process. And this is one that we've now gone back and double checked after a year to 2 years, and it does not have to be re-implemented the same way, let's say, prolonged exposure therapy does, and those kinds of things.
It's a different conversation, but to me, the answer is really clear. It's about the finances. If you ever study the history of medicine, we would think that Western medicine is because it's the best and it's proven. It was a political ploy. And it was all about money, monetizing this practice. And that's how we got modern medicine as we know it in the West. So
it still is that same way, whether it is in psychiatry, and I'm not literally casting aspersions upon your community. I'm talking about this et al. I worked on various things, from a medical device out of the University of Wisconsin that it's called the PONS device. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. PONS, portable neuromodulation device, the system that literally has been proven to be one of the most effective treatments for traumatic brain injury, MS. As a matter of fact, I helped get this device, get it through FDA over a 10-year period of time. It got FDA approval here in the United States for MS, mild to moderate gait problems, and in Canada, it got FDA approval or a CE mark for traumatic brain injury, MS, Parkinson's, stroke, all varied reasons. One for mild to moderate gait issues, and also for a myriad of secondary endpoints that seem to achieve. And also in Australia, got FDA approval for stroke. So it's a medical device that really can change outcomes for a myriad of people who suffer from neurological disease. It's been another one of these things that has been an uphill battle trying to, number one, stop those who were, we had a pretty hostile takeover a couple of years back. Then people got involved in what you have said, it's all about money. And so they've kind of outpriced this device for the majority of people in the world to be able to use. But this is something I use myself personally as a sufferer from MS that literally changed my life. and has kept me on the track that I've been on for now. I've been using the device for 12 years, and it's changed my life over the course of 12 years. But again, it's one of those things where breakthroughs like that, you just get beat down by science because it's going to take money out of the pockets of other people.
Yeah. So it's no longer about humanity and people that have lives that they can live, that can be fruitful lives. That's the one thing I love America. That's one of our Achilles heels that we have to do better with. There's so many hurting people in the world, and somehow the dollar, outweighs our concern and compassion.
That's, to me, has probably going to be mankind's real downfall, because as we look at the next 3 to 4 years, we set back 2 years ago and 3 years ago and faced a pandemic that we thought would forever change the planet, but we have not paid attention to the next pandemic that's coming. And I say pandemic, but the pandemic of mental health care and mental health issues. I mean, we're sitting in a nation right now where, depending on whose stats you read from today or yesterday or tomorrow, we have probably about a 25 to 30% population in this country that is suffering on a daily basis from symptoms of PTSD. I mean, I think that we need to stop. I mean, you hear our president say, they want to start doing some things about, mental health issues. But I think, to me, that seems to be nothing more than lip service. We are only paying lip service. We can't even correct the PTSD and the anxiety that's happening in the halls of our Congress. We have a congressperson or a senator stand up and be willing to go to blows with another senator, and we put that on the air, and we make sure that that's on the news cycle for at least 48 hours. I'm blown away. I mean, how about you? What do you think?
No, me too. I feel that in order to make real change, it's going to take people like you and I. We don't have an agenda. We're not trying to get reelected, and luckily we have technology now. So now I can put anything on blast on social media, and so you can create your own narrative. This sounds really weird, but one of the things that I was even saying is certain communities need to create their own social media. You know why? You can't be shut down. And you can galvanize people around causes and things that are important, instead of listening to the different lies and stories that are spun, or propaganda is what I want to say. But
I agree with you, but unfortunately, the way the technology exists, you end up having to rely on someone else's base technology.
Gotcha.
I mean, let's say you decide to create your own. Let's say I'm tired of Twitter and I'm tired of X, so I want to create the Montel, the M.
Right.
If I create the M, I still need a platform to put that on.
Yeah, but let me tell you something. Need is the mother of invention. And if it comes to that point where we're pushed where that has to happen, guess what? Somebody's going to come up with it. Watch.
Yes. And you just wish that you're that smart mind that knows how to come up with the baseline. Because I tell you, if I could figure out how to do that today, I would do that today.
Yeah, no, and then we'd have funds to be able to really change things in the world. Because let's be real, it really also comes down to your ability to have influence and your ability to have resources. And so we're really talking about wealth. It's almost like he who dies with the most toys wins. There's so many dreams and visions that I have about change. But the first question is, how am I going to make that happen? Because you're going to need a resource. You're going to need some sort of supply of something or connection in order to make that happen.
Let's take a quick little turn to the right here and just talk about that in itself. You have been in the halls of Congress. You have been in the halls of the White House. So have I. You have walked and sat and talked with world leaders. They recognize you for your expertise. They recognize the fact that you have so much to give to our society. Yet, see, from my perspective, I say, damn it, why has not somebody stepped up and helped Dr. Jacquie create, a portal that people can go to just to better their health? Why hasn't somebody stepped in and said, I'm willing to roll the dice, boom, right now on Dr. Jacquie, because I know how many people she can help.
But sometimes it's the degrees of separation. You're separated from the very people that have the power to do that for you, right? They don't know about you. So, you have to become that blip on the radar.
Right.
Like, I know that you've been an activist around so many health related things in the past. So, you had the ability. Why? Because you were on television and radio and in the media. They knew your name. And so that influence allowed you to speak a message that could be heard. And so I think it's about elevating. Now we know about elevating brand and getting name recognition so that people recognize the value of what you have to share. And that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about relationships too, Montel, because the breakdown of marriage and the family is another issue that plagues health and emotional well-being. One of the benefits of marriage is better emotional and physical health. You live longer, particularly males, live longer when they're married versus single. But we know if the relationship is not good, if it's not healthy and fulfilling, it could be taking years off your life instead of adding them.
I'm so happy that you have identified this and now wish that the country would or the world would come behind this and make people understand that rather than use, let's say, the internet and use today's lifestyles as a way to separate, because I constantly see nothing but advertisements about trying to find a new date, whether you're in this group, that group, this group, that group, this group, that group, this group, that other. It's almost as if we're so busy looking for the next relationship rather than focusing on, I used to have this old saying, the grass is always greener on the other side. That's not true. Water your own damn grass.
That's what I say.
Grass,
there
right?
you go. It creates this comparative syndrome. But I'm going to go a little bit further. I want to say this. I think that we look to media to define what relationships are. If your concept of a relationship is wrong, your outcome or is going to be wrong also. You cannot get out of a relationship some of the things you want out of it because it just doesn't work like that. So what we see on television is that, you have these little cute arguments. I love King of Queens. You watch that. She gets upset about something. It's like they laugh it through. That doesn't go down like that in most homes. You know that, right? So we have this idea of how romantic relationships are and marriages are. Are they romantic? Yeah, sometimes. But most men are not romantic. Most women might not even be romantic in those terms. Nothing looks made up, poised with perfect lighting in real life. Relationships are messy and they're not always romantic. They're more mundane than probably anything, right? So if we look at relationships, even from the vantage point of history, they've never been about love and romance. They've been about economic stability. They've been about partnership and furthering a legacy. But the industrial age marked the time where we began to romanticize relationships, when we became mobile and got outside the prying eyes of our chaperones and stuff like that. It began to be about romance. And at the same time, we see talking television and we see the Beavers and all these make-believe families. So we have been programmed to believe that this is the life that we're supposed to be building out. And if ours doesn't look like that, it's wrong. We have all of these wrong notions about relationships and marriage. Somebody's supposed to make you happy. You better come with your own happiness. Somebody's supposed to complete you. You better come whole so that two wholes can make a new object together. Just so many different things. Like, it is mundane. I love Michelle Obama when she started to talk about how many years she was married and was unhappy. The average amount of months that someone is unhappy before they file for divorce or separate is about 5 to 6 months. They're out of there. I've been married 34 years in January. Have I been unhappy some of the time? Absolutely. I would have almost divorced over one cyclic argument that we had about how to raise the kids. Almost took us out. Luckily, I realized, you know what? I have one more year. My last son goes off to college. If I can just hold on to that, the genesis, the nexus of the problem should be resolved. And so I waited.
Right.
I remember some years ago, Montel, they said that kids are better off if you divorce, if you're in an unhappy marriage. I was in Texas about 15 years ago, and I read an article where they said they realized that research was faulty and that that's not true.
I would agree with you 100%. I unfortunately, I've been married for 43 years, 3 times. So,
yeah.
I've lived twice. Though my this last marriage I've been in now 17 years, so it's outlasted them all.
Yes.
And for a reason, because, I think all the things that you had said, instead of trying to find someone to complete me, I found someone that, I think we both accentuated each other. Rather than complete each other, we both came together and we've realized that, from day one, that this was something that we were willing to work at to maintain. I've changed I never, I used to be one of those believers that, old dogs can't learn new tricks or you can't be, and, and I don't mean changed in the sense of fundamentally who you are, but there are things and ways that you have been programmed to respond to certain things that once you realize that that response was nothing more than, a treat that you would give to a dog, or that response was precipitated by the fact that this is how I've been trained to respond, rather than actually stop, look at the issue at hand, and figure out how you're going to respond to that one. That's what's been the biggest difference in this relationship that I've had right now for 17 years, and I think it will be the reason why this relationship will last till my last breath.
Yes.
Because we both are committed to
Doing the work.
doing the work, and there's work, and not a day goes by that there is not work.
Mm-hmm.
And anybody who looks at it that way that says, "Oh no, there's some days where everything was just so perfect," those days weren't that perfect. They may have been days when you were by yourself, but they weren't necessarily days that your relationship was as perfect as you think it was. That's what you fantasize about. And I'd like to echo what you were just saying about the way we're being programmed. I and my wife are deep streamers. I don't know how to call it. We literally love to just stream everything that's out there. And I'm fascinated by media anyway, so I look at a lot of the program we look at from a director's eye. So I may be sitting here watching the same show that she's watching. She's paying attention to the plot line. I'm paying attention to the camera angles. I'm trying to see how many angles it took for that 3-second scene, and it's going on in the back of my brain while I'm watching this. And I am so annoyed right now, though, by we've commented on it. It's like, is every relationship focused? If you look at some of the streaming shows that are out there right now, everybody comes home, pours themselves at least a 3-inch glass of some brown liquor before they have a conversation. I don't know people walking around at 9 o'clock in the morning. Maybe they are out there, but I don't know that many of them that are belting down 2 or 3 hits of scotch before noon.
But this is what you see now. The other thing that you see on all these shown on television with all the relationships is sex. Immediate, hot, passionate, ongoing sex. If a guy has more than one bullet in his chamber, you're lucky.
Right.
But so now what do people want? They want to know about sex first. So it's not about even getting to know anyone. It's about, can he or she check all of these boxes? And I just think it's unfortunate. And you can't get a fulfilling, enduring relationship or marriage out of that. You know how you need the flour, the eggs, the vanilla to make that cake?
That's fact.
Yeah. Those are not the ingredients.
Right. Well, you've come up with some ingredients to help people figure out whether or not they're even on the right track. You came up with something called compatibility quiz. Tell me a little bit about that.
It doesn't matter where I'm at, Montel. People are always asking me. They're telling me about the horror stories of trying to date and find someone. It's a rat race out there now. And I'm so glad I've already been paired up and I don't have to be out there. But the question is, how will I know? How will I know if this person is the right person for me? And I think that there's a lot about conversations and how to have them that's really not understood, particularly with our younger generations who are so into technology that instead of having these face-to-face conversations, they're texting 2 or 3 sentences. They're not seeing each other in their natural habitat. And I think the compatibility quiz is all about helping you to measure. So it's a metric to measure across those 7 constructs. Are you compatible with one another? So in my practice, I discovered that there's 7 different constructs or 7 pillars upon which to build a healthy relationship. Have
you already written this and delivered this in a book?
Oh yeah.
Okay, what's the book? So I can
Marriage Blueprint.
Marriage Blueprint?
On Amazon.
And I want people to go out and buy it. Can you just give us the highlights of it so that they'll want to go out and get a copy of that book?
I guess the long and skinny of it is that my husband and I talked indefinitely about every sort of hypothetical thing. I feel that a lot of people are getting married and don't understand their partner's position on too many essential aspects of marriage. Like, do you believe marriage is forever? What are you willing to do if our marriage is in trouble? How many children you want? How are we going to raise our children? So those 7 constructs are your marital beliefs. That is about how you envision yourself in that marriage, playing what sort of role, doing what sorts of things, how you envision your partner and what you envision them doing or not doing. Number two, marital beliefs. Your marital beliefs, morals and values is the second one. And that's your core self. People talk about, am I compatible? What needs to be compatible and not opposite is your core self. That's what you value and what you believe, your morals.
If I can stop you there for just a second, that's the one that I think more people should work on before they even work on number one. They should work on that, understanding who they are before they enter a relationship.
I agree.
I think we spend so little time trying to figure out who we are, trying to put those, beliefs on someone else and picking them as a partner, thinking that they agree with me, but I don't even know what I agree with.
Exactly. And so what I did is I kind of took the template from my life, what worked for me and my husband. I can tell you that 90% of the things that we talked about have already come to pass. There was only one thing that we had difficulty working out. I asked him, if I don't want to take birth control and we don't want to have any more children, would you get a vasectomy? And that was the only thing he said, look, nobody's cutting anything anywhere on me. And so if that's the stopping block, then we have a problem. And so I had to, acquiesce to that. But we've worked through almost all things because it's like our preamble. I already know what to expect. So when this happens, when an in-law does this and oversteps, we already know what to do because we already discussed it and agreed on what is to be our actionable steps, right? So like I said, about 80-90% of what we discussed has already happened. And so we just stuck to the script. So think about it. You have most reasons why marriages fail or relationships fail is because of unresolved conflict.
Right. Give me number three.
So number three would be family, finances. The next one would be sex and intimacy, solving disagreements, and religion. So I think I covered all 7 of them. And those are all important pillars. So if you align on all of them, it doesn't mean that you come to the table aligned. It means that you figure out where you're misaligned and you build out your workaround.
And you understand that the other person has a right to have a different opinion on any one of those 7, correct?
That's why you got to work it out. And you do it beforehand so that you already know what your non-negotiables are and what you can and what you cannot deal with, right? So there are some non-negotiables that people need to know that they have. What are they? And a non-negotiable is a non-starter. That means that at the onset of the relationship, if this is going to be a part of the equation, it's a no for me, Bob, and you need to know that. But as you shared, many people don't know what they even want. And so what I love about the questions and the different chapters of the book is that it helps you to figure that out also for yourself.
One more time, throw out the name of the book and where we can get
Blueprint for Marriage. Amazon.
Blueprint for Marriage on Amazon. So I want all you guys out there, she's just giving you the highlights, some of the highlights. Go out and pick up a copy of the book because I think, right now it's so important. I think we as a nation need to refocus on those basic relationships to ensure the longevity of this nation.
I agree.
I think, we can talk about all the political divide that we want, but, that's the reason why, most recent, the holidays that just passed, Thanksgiving. How many people sat down at a Thanksgiving dinner and just had one relative and one, family member out on the porch smoking a cigarette, angry, mad, and they're kicking the walls because of a conversation that happened over dinner when it didn't even have to happen that way.
You're right. Absolutely right. And I think there's some history around that, isn't it? That the collapse of a nation or an empire begins with the breakdown of the family.
Absolutely. And now that's the way you just said that is very interesting because there are people in our society who will define that differently. The breakdown of relationships they think means anything from interracial relationships to, allowing same-sex couples. That's not what we're talking about.
No, that's not. Definitely not what we're talking about. I think it doesn't matter whether you have a nuclear family or what type of family that you have. You have to have the 2 components, though, where you have people that are committed to one another, that are able to raise and produce productive citizens in society, people that are whole and healthy and able to, to grab their potential and to fulfill it.
Absolutely. I want to go back to something you said a little earlier about the fact that, for such a long time, there were so many people leading the charge that if in fact there was difficulty in the marriage, it would be better if you just divorce and let the kids grow up that way rather than stay together. Expand upon that a little bit.
Well, I think that the exact term was if you're unhappy in your marriage. So we're not talking about, just to qualify, we're not talking about abusive relationships where someone's being battered or physically or emotionally abused. We're just talking about a relationship where you guys aren't getting along well. There's conflict. You're unhappy. And like you said, you're looking at your escape route because you think that there might be something better out there for you. In those relationships, what we do know is that children that are a product of divorce usually are not, they don't do as well in school. They're not as happy, and they tend to also become products of divorce. Now, we know that some cultures cultivate, even though parents are not together, that they co-parent very well. So your co-parenting is going to be very important to how well your child transitions through divorce. But what I'm saying about it is that now the research shows that that's really not true. It's life, right? Most of what we're complaining about is not like something weird happened to you or me. It's just life. And so how do our kids learn how to deal with life? They watch you doing it. So they're going to learn how to get through the conflict in their marriage by the way that they see you do it. Now, my parents were married almost 40 years, I remember. They divorced late in life. And I think they went through the hurricane. They went through some really severe crises, but, and they made it. Thank God I was already an adult. But at 30 something years old, when my parents divorced, I have to tell you, it affected me more than the death of my sister.
Wow.
It was very, very, very emotional. I felt as if my father was also divorcing me. He was divorcing the other children, my other siblings. It was catastrophic. So reading it in a book, I felt like, oh, okay, I understand that this impacts negatively young children. But going through it myself, my experiential understanding of it, profound. It is very, very destructive.
And I will here, complete disclosure. I've been divorced twice. I have 2 children from 2 different marriages. And I have seen the difficulty that those divorces really caused on my kids. All of my children, I'm knock on wood, blessed that they have now grown and transitioned into adulthood. They all have very meaningful relationships themselves. They are all successful in their own right. But, I know with all of them, they carry a cloud, that every now and then it'll rear its head. And, I'll get some advice from you, but, from my perspective, now that we are all well into our adult worlds, I mean, my youngest is 29, about to turn 30. And my oldest is 39, just had my first grandchild. I am at a place right now in my life, especially with this relationship that I'm in right now. Like I've sat down with each one of my children individually because I do believe that each one of us has a different relationship than we would have had things been different, but we have a different relationship from all the others. Every one of my children has a direct relationship with me. I have said to each one of them, look, you know what, if you want to try to relive the past from 18, 19 years ago, because you're looking for an answer to a question from 19 years ago, I'm going to suggest to you that maybe we just try to figure out the answers to everything in life between now and the rest of our lives. Because for me, it's a very difficult time for me to want to remember. I don't want to go through that again. I'm never going to say anything to disparage your mother, ever. Words will never come out of my mouth. You can blame me for everything. I don't care. However, I really feel you need to figure out how we are going to have a relationship moving forward. So if I do some things now that bother you, tell me. And let's work at what I need to do to rectify that. Don't tell me I did something today that reminded you of something I did 30 years ago, because I can't see how that's true. And if it is true for you, I'm willing to accept that. And I'm going to tell you, I think you need to go talk to somebody about it. But I'm not going to go through that again. Now, am I wrong for saying that?
I think that you're being honest, right? But I think you gave context. So all too often people don't do that. They say, I'm not going to go through that again. I'm not going to answer your question. I don't want to talk about it.
You know,
But you explained. So what I find with communication, Montel, is over talking is usually better than non-talking, right? So what you expressed was, I'm never going to disparage your mother. I made a mistake. I'm present in your life, and I just want to go forward because it was so traumatic for me as well. I don't want to go back there. Number two, I don't want to disparage your mother in any way, and there's really nothing I can do to regain it. What I would ask is that you add one other thing, which will be this question. What do you need from me, and what can I give you? Or what can I give you that would help you in your healing journey?
and I'm sorry because I should have told you that that's one of the first things that I've said. I get it. I understand the pain that you see. I'm not necessarily sure that some of the pain that you feel is for the right reasons. That's not to say I'm saying that something you were told was a lie. I'm just trying to say that you've got to remember, just like if you and I watch the news tonight, we're going to walk away from the news with two entirely different impressions of what we saw. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. I'm going to walk away from it based on my life experience. You're going to walk away from it based on yours. I can't tell you that you're wrong. I can tell you that I disagree. But the points of disagreement are important.
Yeah.
I mean, something that happened in the past.
Yeah, but it's hard for a child because they're still at the place of their wounding, right? But here's what I want to tell you. Time is so beautiful because I look at even things that my kids one of my sons would criticize me for. Now, guess what? Congrats on your grandchild, your first. I now have 3 in like 3 years. Had none 3 in 3 years. But guess what? Now I don't have to say anything or defend myself. Because you know what? Now he has a child. And his child acts like him.
Oh my goodness.
That life code is amazing. Genetics is like, it's the ultimate payback. Because now his child acts just like him. So now he understands. I don't have to use words to explain anything that I said, anything that I did, anything that I didn't do. Because now he understands what it's like to parent one of you.
Oh my goodness!
Outside, we see this way. We don't see that way.
Oh my goodness! I wish this was something that everybody could just blow up and see at the beginning of every day around the world. Because my daughter, about a month and a half ago, said to me, my grandson's name is Damien, and this is really I'm not just talking smack here. I'm just telling the truth. He's one of the smartest children I've ever seen. At 15 months old, the kid's got probably a 400-word vocabulary.
Wow.
At 15 months old. He can literally, at 15, 16 months old, identify and say the word trapezoid. Now, my daughter and her husband, my son-in-law, have really been training him and working with him. He has nothing but educational toys. This child just thrives on trying to learn something. He blew me away at like age 12 or 12 months old. He was already walking, but he's walking along, looks up in the sky and says, airplane, and said it clear enough, airplane.
Wow.
And he walks around looking for airplanes. He loves things in the sky. They took him to an airplane museum. Went nuts. Now he knows what a wing is. He knows what the flap is at 15 months. But he also, I have a daughter who was an adolescent onset epileptic. I'm telling you, I look at the community that tried to treat her and think that that's just as abysmal as it ever has been, and it still is the same way today because they drug children way too early with drugs that were never intended to be used by children of that age. And my child developed some severe issues throughout her adolescence, and when she became early 20s, she finally got beyond it herself. Her seizures started to wane, though she still has them on occasion now, but not with any level of frequency that she will complain about. But because of all that, my child is a very anxious young lady. Anxiety is one of the things, and she's frustrated very quickly. And now she has a child who is already at 16 months demonstrating that if he can't learn something, homeboy gets mad. And she looked at me and said the other day, I have to back off him because he's just like me. And I went, Really? And she looked at me and said, okay, never mind. I said, but you understand. That's I ain't saying nothing else.
Mhm.
But you know what you're about to go through because this little boy is not going to, he just has such a voracious appetite for knowledge. It's ridiculous. And if you try to stop him, he's got, he's loved books since the time he could turn one open. So now books are his thing. If he can open a page and point to a picture and tell you what it is, that's glory for him. And he wants to make sure everybody knows he knows everything about that book. But if he opens up a page and he can't remember what that is, oh my goodness, he won't throw a fit. He just gets mad. He won't change the page. You can go to the next page. He'll want to go back to that page until he remembers it himself. You tell it to him, he gets mad at you. And it's like, Ashley, do you ever remember this behavior yourself? And she will look at me and go, just shut up. So
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
But you get it.
So let's see what you do. Because I think that parents parent the best way that they know how. And like I was saying, we don't understand what it is to take care of us or to interface with us. We just know what we want and what we think somebody would have done as an after the fact quarterback. You're going to second guess what someone did. And so, yeah, I find it's two ways though. I also find working with, so I have two sons. One does all of my entertainment stuff. And then the other one works in the nonprofit that I founded about 30 years ago. And it's so funny because I look at him, things that he does that I don't like. And I'm telling you, it's a motivator for me to stop that right then and there. Like I don't have to try to figure out how to stop it. I stop it immediately because I can see the impact. Right. So it works with him seeing how difficult he is by looking at his child. And I see myself in him. And so all of those things are motivations for change. I think what I would say is just to your listening audience, your viewers is this: always be a lifelong learner. Correct. If you want to see a bitter person, it's usually a person that decided, I'm not going to change. I'm who I am and I'm not changing anything. That person that wouldn't put in that work, the work that they would have put in to be better, is now the same work they're putting in to deal with the bitterness, the discontent, the dissatisfaction, and the unhappiness in their life. So it's like either way, the universe is going to demand that you put in some energy. Is it going to be for this or is it going to be for that?
Well, can you talk a little bit about, before we run out of time, can you talk a little bit about some of the most common relationship problems that marriages experience?
Well, you mentioned one earlier, which is the greener grass syndrome, our ability to always feel that we want to compare our relationship to someone else's and to think that theirs looks better, sounds better, feels better than ours does. That's a big one. The second one I would say would be communication issues. We all have different communication styles, different love languages, and so forth and so on. And figuring out how to develop a workaround for that so that you're cohesive is going to be a challenge. I'd say another one would be finances, always finances. And now sex. Sex has become a bigger divide than ever because there's so much variety now in terms of sexual exploits and sexual appetites that it's now starting to show up pretty big on the screen as well.
And show up with, so how can a family, I mean, again, I think communication is probably the key to everything. Mm-hmm. True communication. How does a couple overcome those kinds of issues?
Communication issues. I feel that every couple should see someone. If you have an impasse and you start developing circularity in your arguments, meaning that you argue about the same thing over and over again, different time, different day, but basically that's the crux of it. You need to get a third voice because you need someone that's going to mediate and help you see what the other person is saying and help you to hear what you've missed so that you can find a workaround. Because the longer that you continue to argue about the same thing, resentment begins to build. Discontent begins to build. And so, it begins to create a scar when really you can just knock it out and get back on track.
This could be something that, again, I guess the difference in relationships of, let's say, newlyweds or young couples and aging couples is that newlyweds or young couples have an opportunity to build from the beginning a relationship that's focused on conflict resolution rather than conflict delay.
Interesting. Say that again.
I think that a younger couple has greater opportunity to focus on conflict resolution rather than delaying that. Sometimes in newlywed couples, all the fantasy of a new relationship is there. All those things that are really secondary to relationships are the ones that they, fantasize about all the time. The sex life, this. But then when something comes up that bothers them, well, let's just push that aside because I don't have to talk about that right now. Where that's really where they should focus right there is not putting off what can be done today to tomorrow, but taking care of it today so that it doesn't fester to tomorrow.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I look at it a little. I agree with that lens. I feel that newlyweds are more embroiled in trying to become one, forming and norming. Forming and norming, how to make two separate bodies into one cohesive body. So a lot of their energy is in trying to figure out how we're going to live together, how are we going to get along, how are we going to, meld our finances together and so forth and so on. Whereas an older couple, what I would say is this: younger couples they're building out a life together, right? They have all these plans about this life that they want to live and that they want to create. Whereas older couples have already done that phase. They've been through that phase for the most part. And so now a lot of times their expectations are different. They're looking for something different now. They've already had the career. They might be in it. They've already, maybe started building the family. So maybe what they're looking for is going to be very, very different. It's more around companionship. It's more around having a life partner versus maybe all the feeling and all of the activity and the busyness towards, building out this life. So I think it's really important to look at those differences and understand what they are. Number two, the older couples already settled and became who they basically are going to be for the rest of their lives. Whereas younger couples are just becoming. So like a flower bud that's opening up, they're changing and evolving so rapidly over time that they have to be aware of the fact that they're not going to be the same person. So they're not going to be married to the same person for very long, because as they go out building their individual lives, they're also changing. So a lot of what they came to the marriage expecting or wanting to build out might very well change. And this is why you see people divorcing after if they've made it 10 years, you'll see them divorcing after being married 10, 12 years. It's because now they've evolved so much that they're very different. And it doesn't mean that they don't fit together, that they're no longer compatible. It merely means that they need to renegotiate the terms of their relationship. What is it that they want to start to do now? What is it that they want? What is it that they don't want? And so forth.
I'm going to run out of time here quickly, but how do you think social media has been impacting marriages these days?
Negatively. And I just can't say it enough. It makes me sad because people are cheating on social media. But again, as I mentioned earlier, they're looking at these posed lives, airbrushed, screened lives that people are demonstrating, and that's their metric for how well they're doing in their life. And it's a false metric. So I think it's definitely hurt people's ability to even develop holistic interpersonal skills even.
Sure. Well, Dr. Jacquie, I hope that very soon someone decides to fund your paradigm so that, there's another voice out there that people will stop and listen to so that, we can start correcting some of the deficiencies that are going on in our society. Because I think, again, like you said, all the things that we see in this great divide in America these days, I think starts inside those four walls of a home.
Yes.
And if we can start to heal that, we can start to heal as a nation, but we will never heal as a nation until we start to heal the relationships that we have. I mean, I look at some of our politicians and know, I really would love to be able to find out what's going on when the cameras are off in their home. And I can find out why they have the attitudes they have towards so many things that are so detrimental to our society. But we don't even take the time to even look at and investigate. Now, I'm not talking about looking at the personal life of our politicians, but looking at their personal relationships and looking at what's going on in their life. I bet you will find a reflection of how they decide on bills that affect everyone else.
No, I get it. And I totally agree. And I think people are so concerned about, are we still a superpower and how much longer will we be? We're going to be a superpower as long as we begin to cultivate strong citizens, strong people, strong families, strong communities.
I agree with you 100%, but I think one of the things that's always been to America's fault has been this idea that at some point in time, we are going to be this great melting pot. We were never, ever going to be a melting pot. this society was never going to be a consomme. We were never going to blend things up and come up with a broth that has little pieces of everything. No, we're always going to be a stew. We're always going to be a stew that has to acknowledge all of its individual component parts go together to make the taste.
You did
There's
it.
going to always be a potato. There's
Yes.
always going to be a carrot.
Yes.
There's always going to be a green bean. There's always going to be an onion. Let them exist. And guess what? When you rub them all together, take one bite of the stew, that's why your mouth explodes, because you have so many different flavors that excite your senses. When you try to blend them all together and make them a consomme, how many often do you go to a restaurant and say, "Oh, I'll take the consomme soup over the..." No, you go for the soup. And you go for the soup.
I've never heard that analogy, but let me tell you, it's pretty good. It hits.
Well, thank you. And that's, I'm hoping, how America can save itself and starting to recognize that we need to be a stew.
Yeah.
So, and we also need to acknowledge one more time, give out your book so I can let people know, go pick it up.
Dr. Jacqueline Del Rosario, Blueprint for Marriage on Amazon.
Dr. Jacquie, I'm telling you, I'm sorry, my mouth ran on some of the other different topics. I had so much more I wanted to talk to you about. I would love to have you back if you have a chance.
It would be my pleasure. Love it. Looking forward.
Absolutely. Let's kick it up. Let's kick it up another time. My office reach out to you and see if we can get you back. And because there's so much more I think that you have to share with so many out there that can help make people's lives better. Thank you so much for being a part of Free Thinking with Montel today, okay?
You got it. Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Jacquie here. I'm your how-to lady. How to do life, how to do love, and how to do you, boo. So click, like, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more to come.